think that we can expect to see changes. And I know our image of aging really is changing, and what we've got, of course, is the baby boom. People of my generation are now getting older and are beginning to look freshly at aging, and we come at it with new perceptions. And I expect that I'm not going to age the way my parents did, and I think many people of my generation feel that way, and frankly we look to people like you to offer us guidance, because you've explored this area so deeply, and perhaps we can begin by talking about some of the approaches that you have found most effective in looking at the question of aging.
Well, I think it was experimental. I and a bunch of my friends, some of them are now rather well known, like Ken Dykewald and Eugenia Gerard, got together and we said, hey, aging can't be what they're telling us. And we got together in a living room and found 12 rather venturesome older people who were willing to experiment with us. And we tried everything that was working for us. Here we were part of what was called the Human Potentials Movement. I was studying with a Tibetan Lama, and Eugenia was doing all sorts of therapeutic techniques, and Ken had been at Esalen and studying yoga and so on. And we decided that we would put everything together in one living room. And what had worked for us would probably work for them, but they didn't have the money or the stamina to kind of go around and gather these techniques the way we did. And it did work. I mean, the thing that's interesting about SAGE is, that's what we called our little program, that people changed. They gathered health, confidence. One of the women who came in, the very first person to come into the program, said her life was over. She was then 76. Her husband was dying, and she thought life was finished for her. She's now 92, and she's been working, she just published a book on how the rest of life can gather to a very final graduation point that should be beautiful. And she's trying to create something called a last resort.
The last
Yeah. But, I mean, here she is, almost 20 years later. And many of the people who went through the program just took on their lives in a whole different way than they thought was possible in their mid-70s.
Yeah. Now, I get the impression that there's something very elusive about this work. I mean, we could talk about techniques for having the body be flexible. We could talk about the great spiritual traditions. But my sense is that it's difficult to speak of, but I think we must. It has to do with love. That when older people are really in an environment together and allow, in some sense, to allow their hearts to open and to unfold, that's where the real treasure is.
Yeah, that was where our organization kind of fell apart, because we couldn't replicate something. You can't buy love. So when we started being an organization that was trying to teach something and hire people to work with groups, we couldn't hire them to love the people in the groups. That was a really hard thing. I was hoping it would become a grassroots movement and people would just do it in their homes. It takes a lot of commitment and a lot of self-confidence. But there isn't any reason why we can't do this. What we did was overcome the fear of closeness that people have and the fear of their own divulging their vulnerability. Once we got over that, these groups of people said to us that they were closer to each other than they were to their own families. And this made it possible for them to do things that I don't know why we don't do, but things like when somebody was ill or in some way isolated, having meetings in dreams. You know, they could dream of each other and set a time and actually know they were together. There are all sorts of things that are available that don't cost money. All they cost is attention. And I suppose what you're saying is we don't give that attention readily unless there's a lot of love and compassion that goes with it.
But what I hear you saying is that this is something that people of a generation who are aging can offer to each other, rather than for them to try and get something from the younger generation to help them along. they can work with their peers.
Absolutely. I think the only role that the younger generation played in this, and at that time I was part of the younger generation, now I'm part of the older generation. At that time it was to bring some of these techniques and experiences into the hands of older people. They weren't then published. I mean, everything's out there now. The other thing was to bring some energy that people needed. And I suppose that's the role of an intergenerational group. I would never, again, do an ageist group like SAGE. People began saying, you know, I've got a daughter of 50 and a granddaughter of 35, and I want them to learn this.
Well, let's talk, though, about people who are older. One of the main stereotypes is that people get rigid as they get older. And in my experience, I think unless somebody has really been consciously working on themselves not to be rigid, people do. They lock into patterns. They have habits that are well set, and older people can be very touchy. And I think some of the people you worked with in SAGE were this way. When they first came in, they were quite rigid, and you found ways to break through those barriers. And I wonder if we could talk about that.
Yeah, there were a lot of ways. And first thing was to get into the body. And what I mean by getting into the body was like taking a deep breath and feeling where you're sitting in the chair. And people might just do this along with us. And feel whether you like the in-breath or the out-breath better, which part is the longest, which is the most relaxing for you. Taking in air and filling your lungs, or exhaling and letting it out. And then beginning to notice, well, how does that breath feel as it goes can you feel it going all the way down into your belly? And then there were slowly, as we learned how to relax, we did other techniques. People didn't like relaxation at first. Some people said, this feels awful. Well, they were feeling for the first time things that were right there. Rigidity takes a lot of energy. I mean, one demonstration that I do with people all the time is hold a fist. Just hold a fist really tight while you're listening to me. And keep holding it. That's how we hold our bodies. And if you keep holding this and holding it tighter and tighter as you're listening, you'll find that the tension spreads up your arm. Just keep holding it. And don't stop.
You want me to do? Oh,
yeah, hold it.
All right.
Yeah, I just want
It's
you to
hard.
see how, yeah, just keep holding
It's
it.
hard work.
And it's hard to pay full attention as you're holding this fist. And that's part of our mental problem as we get older, is that we're holding a lot of places, and until we begin to relax these places, we don't know how much energy we've been spent holding them back. So now when you let go of your hand, what happens?
Oh, it's...
How does it feel?
Well, it felt a combination of feeling stiff and almost crusty, and at the same time a great sense of relief.
Do you feel any heat?
Yeah.
So you can sort of actually feel the calories that you have to burn to hold it rigid. Well, that's what we do with ourselves. We hold back emotions because we haven't been schooled in allowing our emotions to come out without damaging others. Everybody thinks, you know, if I get angry, I'm going to blow the world apart. But that isn't necessary. That's unskilled. That's unconscious. With a little communication skill, it's possible to have one's feelings and not to damage other people.